and blood vessels. Um, the,
The cardiovascular system consists of what and what? The heart and the blood vessels, yes?
yes, sir.
Okay. And then what makes up the circulatory system?
The circulation system is made up of the cardiovascular system and the lymphatic system.
The lymphatic system, good. So we said that the heart has how many pumps?
2 pumps.
What are they? Where are they located?
The two ventricles, the right ventricle and the left ventricle.
The right and the left ventricle, good. So these pumps, they pump blood into what? Into
The
what?
right ventricle. The right ventricle pumps blood into the lungs and deoxygenated blood to the lungs via the pulmonary artery, and the left ventricle pumps blood to other parts of the body through the systemic arteries.
Repeat that. Repeat that.
The right ventricle pumps blood to the lungs, to the deoxygenated blood through the pulmonary vein, and the
Pulmonary what? Through the
left ventricle artery.
pulmonary artery. Good.
Yes. And the left ventricle pumps oxygenated blood to all the other parts of the body through the systemic artery.
So that the largest artery, that systemic artery that leaves the left ventricle directly from the left ventricle, what is it called?
The largest one that leaves.
Yeah, there is an artery that leads directly from the left ventricle. So once blood leaves the left ventricle, the blood enters into an artery. Just the way we have on the right side, we have the pulmonary artery, yes, on the right side. And then on the left side, when blood leaves the left ventricle, it enters into one blood vessel.
The aorta.
The aorta, good, the aorta. So it is the aorta that now divides into, it branches to the abdominal aorta and other systemic arteries, yes? Good. So how many, okay, now we said that there are two circuits, yes, in circulation, two circuits.
Yes.
What are the two circuits?
Pulmonary and the systemic.
Pulmonary circuits and the systemic circuit, or the pulmonary circulation and the systemic circulation. So describe the pulmonary circuits for me.
The pulmonary, the pulmonary is from the right ventricle. The right ventricle carries low deoxygenated blood through the pulmonary artery to the lungs. Then, when it gets to the lungs, it then turns the deoxygenated blood to oxygenated blood. Then goes from the lungs to the left atrium.
Good.
That's where it stops.
Good. So the pulmonary circulation begins from the right ventricle and ends in the left atrium, yes?
Left atrium.
Good. Now, tell me about the systemic circulation.
The systemic circulation begins from the left ventricle. Then from the left ventricle, it moves the blood through the aorta to other parts of the body. Then from there, it carries oxygenated blood.
Okay.
But it carries oxygenated blood and moves through the body, and the body uses up the oxygen in other parts. Then from there, it goes to the right atrium. It stops in the right atrium.
How does it get to the right atrium? What carries it to the right atrium?
It's the systemic vein that carries it there.
Yeah, what is the name of those two large veins?
It's the inferior vena cava that carries it there.
And the superior vena cava.
Yes.
The superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava.
Cava.
Where is the superior vena cava coming from? What part of the body is it coming
from? The upper limb, from the head.
Good. From the upper part of the body above the heart, yes? While the inferior vena cava comes from where?
from the lower limbs, from the legs, and
Not only lower limb, all
the,
organs below the heart.
below the arteries.
So blood coming from your lower limbs, your testes, your
Your
ovaries,
liver, yes,
your
everything.
liver, your kidney, they will all come through the inferior vena cava, right into the
Yeah.
right atrium. So that is where the systemic circulation ends. Now, which of these two circuits is longer?
The systemic,
The systemic
because
circulation.
it goes to the other body,
Good.
and the pulmonary only goes to the lung.
To the lungs. Okay, very good. Then we also said that the whole circulation, both pulmonary and systemic circulation, can you explain the whole circulation for me, starting from let's start from the vena cava, the superior and inferior vena cava.
Mm.
So now it's a combination of both uh, pulmonary circuit and systemic circuit.
Okay, so our name starts with pulmonary.
Okay.
Um, the pulmonary circuit starts is formed from the right ventricle.
Okay.
Then from the right ventricle goes to the pulmonary.
Okay. Are you there? Yeah, can you hear me? Hello? I think I lost you. Hello? 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 You have to repeat what you were saying. You were explaining the whole circulation for me.
Well, I said it's from, let's start from the pulmonary from the pulmonary circuit,
Okay.
and it starts its pump from the right ventricle, then takes the blood through the pulmonary artery to the lungs. Then the lungs, then because it carries deoxygenated blood, then the lungs oxygenate the blood, and then it goes through the pulmonary vein to the left um, atrium. Then the left atrium it gives the blood to the left ventricle. Then the left ventricle carries the blood through the aorta. Then it splits the blood through the abdominal aorta and the ascending artery.
Okay.
And then the blood goes to its respective goes to different organs like the trunk, the liver, the digestive tract, the gut, the kidneys, and the pelvis and the upper limbs.
Okay.
And the trunk takes the blood. Then it uses the oxygenated blood. Then it becomes deoxygenated. Then like the trunk and the other parts, the liver and other parts. The liver uses the hepatic artery to receive the blood. Then it goes through the hepatic vein.
Okay.
Um, yes, and the gut goes through takes the blood from the mesenteric artery, then goes out the um, mesenteric vein, and the liver has it receives blood from two planes. One carries nutrient and one carries oxygenated blood. The liver takes the nutrient from the digestive tract to the hepatic portal vein, and one takes blood from the hepatic artery, and the kidney takes blood from the renal artery. Then it goes to the second kidney, and the other kidney then deoxygenates the blood, then moves through the renal vein, up through um, uh, the hepatic vein, if I'm not mistaken. And
The hepatic vein from where? From which organ?
sir,
Hepatic vein is carrying blood from which organ?
and from the kidney.
No.
No, it's the renal vein. Then it goes up. It goes up through the inferior vena cava.
Okay.
Yes.
So which vein carries blood from the liver?
From the liver. Which one carries blood from the liver?
Yeah.
The hepatic vein.
Hepatic vein. Good.
Yes, sir.
Which one carries blood to the liver?
The hepatic artery.
And
One and the hepatic portal vein.
portal vein. Okay, good. So which one carries blood to the kidney?
To the kidney, the renal artery.
Which one carries blood to the spleen?
The splenic artery.
Splenic artery. Which one carries blood to the stomach?
Um, the gastric artery.
Gastric artery. Good. Which one carries blood to the lower limbs?
And the lower limbs is the common iliac artery.
Common iliac artery. Good. Which one carries blood to the ovaries?
The ovarian artery.
Ovarian artery. And the testis?
Testicular artery.
Okay. To the femur?
And femoral artery.
Femoral artery. Very good. Now, which one will return blood from the brain?
Jugular vein.
Jugular vein. Which one will carry blood to the brain?
To the brain, to the carotid artery.
Carotid artery. Carotid.
Carotid artery.
Good. Very good. Very, very good. So the blood coming from the jugular vein, yes,
Yes,
and the blood coming from the upper limb, right?
sir.
All of them will enter the superior vena cava.
Vena cava.
Good. Will enter the superior vena cava, and then the superior vena cava takes it into the right atrium,
Atrium.
while the inferior vena cava also joins and takes the blood into the right
The
atrium.
right atrium.
Good. But this blood is deoxygenated blood, yes?
Yes, sir.
Great, very good. Now, we said that the heart has how many chambers?
4 chambers.
How many?
Four.
4 chambers. What are they?
The left and right atrium and the left and right ventricle.
Go left and right atrium and the left and right ventricle. So, Now, I didn't mention this to you, but I want to mention it today. The left and right atrium is separated by a septum. Yes, the
Yes,
left and right atrium is separated by a septum called the intra-atrial septum. Interatrial septum. So it separates the two septum. Why the lower chamber, the right ventricle and the left ventricle are also separated by the interventricular septum. When I show you the diagram of the heart, let me see if I can get the diagram of the heart. You will see the picture of the septum there. Let me see if I can find the diagram here. Okay, they don't have a diagram here, but in the anatomy atlas, you will see that you see the septum that separates both the ventricles and the atrium. Maybe I will look for a bigger picture of the heart to show you the septum that separates the both of them. Then we also said that there is a valve between the right atrium and the right ventricle. What is the name of that valve?
is it tricuspid?
Tricuspid.
Tricuspid.
Tricuspid. Three cups. So cuspid is like cups, yes? So tricuspid means three cups. So that valve has like three flaps or three cusps. That is why it is called tricuspid valve. Okay? I will show you the pictures later. Then we said we also have a valve between the left atrium and the left ventricle.
And bicuspid.
Bicuspid. So bi means two. So it means that that valve has two cusps. So that is why it is called bicuspid valve. Now, what do you think is the function of this valve? I'm not sure I mentioned this to you.
I'm thinking to regulate how the blood flows.
To regulate how the blood flows. So
Yes.
when blood leaves the left ventricle, when the blood leaves the left atrium, it enters the left ventricle. Yes.
Yes.
Now, once that blood enters the left ventricle, there is a possibility that the blood could flow back into the left ventricle. So from this picture, this is left atrium here, and this is left ventricle. When the blood moves in this direction into the left ventricle, there is a possibility of a backward flow of blood into the left atrium. So to prevent that backward flow of blood, that valve will close immediately after blood has entered the left ventricle. The valve closes to prevent the blood from going backward in the backward direction. The same thing happens on the right side. Once the blood leaves the right atrium into the right ventricle, the tricuspid valve closes to prevent the backflow or the flow of the return of blood into the right atrium. So the function of those valves is to prevent backflow of blood. Okay, so when blood leaves the atrium into the ventricles, the two valves will close. The tricuspid valve and the bicuspid valve. And the closure of those valves produces a sound. And the sound, when your heart beats, you hear a sound. And that sound is actually due to the closure of these valves. And the heart sound is lub dub, lub dub, lub dub. So that lub dub sound that you hear is the closure of these valves, the bicuspid and the tricuspid valve. Now, there are two other valves that you need to know about, and these valves are called the pulmonary valve and the aortic valve. Two other valves, apart from the bicuspid or the mitral valve and tricuspid valve, you have two other valves, which are called the pulmonary valve and the aortic valve. So where is the pulmonary valve? Now, we said when the blood leaves the right ventricle, it enters the pulmonary artery, yes?
Yes, sir.
So to prevent the backflow of blood into the ventricle, you need a valve also, which that valve is called the pulmonary valve. So preventing backflow of blood from the pulmonary artery into the right ventricle. Then we said when blood leaves the left ventricle, it enters this aorta or the systemic artery, this aorta, right? So to prevent backflow of blood from this aorta into the left ventricle, you have the aortic valve also. So which prevents a backflow of blood. So the function of those valves really is to prevent the backflow of blood. So name the 4 valves for me now.
The tricuspid valve, the
And the location. Tell me, name the valve.
the tricuspid valve is located in the right atrium.
Okay.
The bicuspid valve is in the left atrium.
No, not in the right atrium. It's located
The left atrium, the left atrium, the bicuspid.
Bicuspid located between the left atrium and the left ventricle. So it is not in the atrium, it is in between the both of them. Okay.
And okay, the pulmonary valve is in between the right ventricle and the pulmonary artery.
Good.
And the aortic valve is in between the left ventricle and the systemic artery.
And the aorta. So from the name, aortic valve. Okay. I know they use systemic artery, but it's aorta. Yeah, it's aorta. Okay, good. Now, we said yesterday that we're going to look at, before I forget, what are the differences? Give me some differences between arteries and veins, because yesterday we gave the characteristic of arteries and the characteristic of veins. So what are some of the differences between arteries and veins?
Artery carry blood to the heart, and veins carry blood.
No. Arteries carry blood.
Carry blood away from the heart. Okay.
Good.
Okay. And pulmonary and the artery, the veins carry blood to the heart.
Okay.
Yes. And the artery carry blood at high pressure, and the veins carry blood at low pressure. And the arteries have thick walls. The veins have they don't have very thick walls. And the artery carries oxygenated blood except one, the pulmonary artery, and the vein carries the
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Very well.
Okay. The artery carries oxygenated blood except one, the pulmonary artery. The veins carry the oxygenated blood except one, the pulmonary vein.
Okay.
And the largest artery is the aorta. The largest vein is the vena cava. And what else?
What is the color of the artery?
Pink.
Pink. Okay. Pink. Some textbooks will say it in red in color. Okay.
Pink or red.
Pink or red. What about the veins?
The veins. Blue.
Blue. Good. Okay. What else did we say about the blood vessels?
There are 3 types of blood vessels: the artery, the vein, and the capillaries.
The arteries, the veins, and the
capillaries.
So today I told you that I'm going to explain the histology of these blood vessels. Yes.
Yes,
explain the histology of the blood vessels, and after that we'll look at the heart again and look at the histology of the heart. So let's go look at the arteries and the histology of the arteries. So here you will find that most vessels of the circulatory system have 3 coats or 3 tunics. Okay, and the 3 tunics are Tunica Intima, which is the innermost layer, Tunica Media, which is the middle layer, and then the Tunica Adventitia, which is the outermost layer. So Tunica Intima is the inner lining consisting of a single layer of extremely flattened epithelial cells called the endothelium. So what you need to know is that the tunica intima is the innermost layer of the blood vessel, and it contains some epithelial cells which are called endothelium. Endothelium. So tunica intima contains endothelium, and this endothelium is supported by what we call a connective tissue. So tunica intima, what do you need to know? It is the innermost layer of the blood vessels, and it contains some group of cells, epithelial cells that we call endothelium. And this endothelium is supported by a skeletal framework or connective tissue. Now, capillaries consist only of this tunica intima. Now, with a basement membrane. Remember, we said that there are three tunics: Tunica Intima, Tunica Media, and Tunica Adventitia. But for the capillaries, they only contain Tunica Intima and basement membrane. Tunica Intima and basement membrane. So it means that capillaries consist of only endothelium and basement membrane. All other blood vessels, arteries, and veins contain tunica intima, tunica media, and tunica adventitia. But for the capillaries, they contain only the tunica intima and basement membrane. So that should tell you that the capillaries are thinner.
Yes.
You know, we said the arteries have thick walls, yes? That is because it has 3 layers. And the veins also have 3 layers, but the arteries have thicker walls. You will see later in the diagram I'll show you. But the capillaries, they only have this tunica intima, which is the group of the of cells called the endothelium, and a basement membrane. Then the tunica media is a middle layer. What do you find in that middle layer? You find smooth muscles. Smooth muscles. So remember, tunica intima contains cells, epithelial cells called endothelium, right? While the tunica media is made up of smooth muscles. And then the tunica adventitia, which is the outermost layer of the blood vessel, contain connective tissue. So it is the connective tissue layer or a sheet for protection, okay? So that is what you need to know. Now, 3 layers: tunica intima, the innermost layer; tunica media, the middle layer; and the tunica adventitia, the outermost layer. For capillaries, they only contain the tunica intima and a basement membrane. Now, the tunica media is the most variable coat. So the tunic that is different in all of these blood vessels in the tunica media. We already know that the capillary does not contain tunica media and tunica adventitia. But for the arteries and the veins, the main difference between them is the tunica media, because both arteries and veins have the 3 tunics. But why is the artery having a thicker wall than the vein? It is because of the tunica media. Because the tunica media is what differentiates the arteries from the veins. Okay? And now we're going to look at the picture that I showed you. There was a picture I showed you yesterday. This one that we snapped. So this picture is showing you the structure or a kind of histology of the arteries and the veins especially. Now let's look at it. Let's identify the 3 tunics that we talked about. So this red one here is an artery, and this blue one is a vein. And then here you have the capillary. Now we said that the innermost layer, the innermost tunic, is the tunica intima, yes? And that tunica intima contains what? Endothelium. So here, you see this innermost layer, this wall, this innermost wall that looks like gray in color. This innermost one is what we call the Tunica Intima, and that Tunica Intima contains what? Endothelium. Endothelium. Now, after this endothelium, you will find another layer. Now, we have what we call a subendothelial layer. Subendothelial layer. Now, look at this subendothelial layer here. So, sub means it is attached or very close to the endothelium. We said that this inside, this innermost layer, is the endothelium. Then here we have the subendothelial layer. Now, between this subendothelial layer, close to this subendothelial layer, you have what we call the internal elastic layer. Internal elastic layer. All of these I just mentioned are still inside the Tunica Intima. So the Tunica Intima contains three main things: vascular endothelium, which is the innermost layer of the intima, and then you have a subendothelial layer just above the vascular endothelium, and then you have an internal elastic layer. Now, this is histology. They're going to ask you that what are the three parts of the Tunica Intima? So the three parts of the Tunica Intima are the vascular endothelium, the subendothelial layer, and the internal elastic
So,
layer. Yes.
is the lumen not part of it?
Yeah, the lumen is just the opening where the blood passes. So the lumen simply means the opening. So that is where the blood passes through the vessel. Okay. Yeah, but you could mention it if, for example, in an exam and they put lumen as part of it, you could mention it. But the lumen simply means the opening. That's what it means. But histologically, the structures are the vascular endothelium, the subendothelial layer, and the internal elastic layer. Then you move to the next layer, which is the Tunica Media. So the Tunica Media, this is the Tunica Media here now. So you see that Tunica Media is above the intima, because the intima is the innermost layer. So in the Tunica Media, what do you find? You find smooth muscles. Smooth muscle, that's what you find in the Tunica Media. And then, now notice something. When you want to move from one tunic to another, there is an elastic membrane. So when you wanted to move between the intima and the media, you found an internal elastic layer that separates the intima, from the media. Now, when you want to move from the media to the adventitia, you find an external elastic membrane. So in the media, you have the smooth muscles and the external elastic membrane. And then once you leave the media, you come to the outermost layer, which is the adventitia. So when you see a blood vessel, the part of it that you see, the outermost layer that you see, is the adventitia of that blood vessel. It is the outermost layer. Then when you go deeper, you move past the external elastic membrane and you see the smooth muscles. Well, this external elastic membrane and the smooth muscles make up the Tunica Media. Then when you go down deep, cut deeper into the blood vessel, you will now find the internal elastic layer, which shows that you are now in the intima. And then you see the subendothelial layer, and then the innermost layer, which is the vascular endothelium. So when blood is flowing through the blood vessel, the blood does not come in contact. So let me ask you this question. When blood is flowing through a blood vessel, which of these layers does the blood come in contact with?
And the vascular endothelium.
The vascular endothelium, which is in the Tunica Intima. Yes, Tunica Intima. Yeah, so that is where the blood comes in contact with the endothelium. Now, so this is how an artery looks. Quickly, three layers: intima, media, adventitia. In intima, you find the vascular endothelium, the the subendothelial layer and the internal elastic layer. And then when you enter the media, you find the smooth muscles, and then you find the external elastic membrane, and then before you find the adventitia. In some exams, they will tell you list in order all the different layers of the artery. Now, not the tunic now, all the different layers of the artery. So name them now.
Adventitia.
Start from the innermost layer.
Okay, innermost. Then you start from vascular endothelium.
Yeah.
The subendothelial layer.
Yeah.
The internal elastic layer. Then the smooth muscles, the external elastic layer, and then the adventitia.
Okay, so I want us to do something to remember. The innermost layer, we said it is. I want to write something. My button isn't working again. Okay, good. Now, so V, vascular endothelium, yes, which is the innermost layer. S, subendothelial layer. I, internal elastic layer. S again, smooth muscle. E, external elastic membrane, and then A, which is the adventitia. So VSISEA, vascular endothelium, subendothelial layer, internal elastic layer, smooth muscles, external elastic membrane, and adventitia. So this could help you in histology exam when they say you should list all of them in an ascending order from the inward to the outward. So you can use this VCC as a mnemonic just to remember it. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Then you must remember that the first three VSI are found where in the intima, while SE are found in the media, and then you have the adventitia. Now let's look at the vein. Let's look at the vein. Now, in the vein, you see the lumen, right? And you will notice one difference, that the veins, they have some cusp, valvular cusp, which we don't have in the artery. That is one difference you should notice between artery and vein, that the veins have some cusp between them.
And it doesn't have the external elastic membrane.
Yes, it doesn't have the external elastic membrane. So now let's look at the structure of the vein. Now, we have the vascular endothelium and the internal elastic layer. So did you notice that there is no subendothelial layer also? Here in the artery, in the intima, we had a subendothelial layer. But in the vein, there is no subendothelial layer. So just from vascular endothelium directly to the internal elastic layer. And then again, when you enter the media, you find only smooth muscles without an external elastic membrane. And then you have your adventitia. So you now see why arteries are thicker than the veins, because in terms of layers, the arteries, from what we did now, 3 tunics, but how many layers altogether? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 layers altogether. But here you only have vascular endothelium, internal elastic membrane, smooth muscle, and adventitia. Only 4. So subendothelial layer is missing from the intima, and external elastic membrane is missing from the media. That is why the arteries are thicker than the veins. And we said the reason is because of the pressure of the blood. We said arteries carry blood at a higher pressure than the veins. Again, let's look at the capillaries quickly. You know, in the capillaries, we said they only contain one tunic. And what is that tunic that they contain? We said they contain only tunical
And the capillary is the tunica intima and the basement membrane.
Good. So they contain only tunica intima and basement membrane. And that tunica intima has the endothelium with a basement membrane. So it doesn't have all this adventitia, doesn't have media, you know. Now, the question is, why do you think that this capillary doesn't have a tunica media, for example? Because the tunica media contains what? What does the tunica media contain?
The smooth muscles
The smooth muscles, yes.
and
And
the
what do you think is the function of these smooth muscles?
uh, I think is to uh,
Okay, so these smooth muscles, they contract, okay? It is the contraction and the relaxation of these muscles that pushes blood, right? So blood is pushed through the vessels because the muscles are contracting and relaxing. So the contraction of the vessels pushes the blood, pumps the blood,
okay.
right? And that also regulates the pressure of the blood. So the pressure of the blood depends on the contraction of those muscles. Now, what do you think will happen when the muscles contract? When the muscles contract, they become shorter and thicker and stronger. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So if you take your hand muscle and you try to contract your hand muscle, it becomes stronger.
Yeah,
Yeah. Good. And it becomes bigger.
yeah.
So what happens is that contraction of the muscles pushes blood. It pushes the blood. So anytime the muscles contract, the blood pressure increases. Normally, they contract to push blood. But if there is anything that increases the contraction of those muscles, your blood pressure will also increase. But we'll talk about that later when we start talking about advanced cardiology and how the vessels work. So let's quickly do a recap of the histology of the arteries and the veins. So all arteries and veins contain how many tunic?
Three tunic.
What are
Uh,
they?
the Tunica Adventitia, the Tunica Media, and the Tunica Intima.
Tunica Intima. But why do we have all these adventitia? What do you think is the reason for this Tunica Adventitia?
The function of the Tunica, I think it's
The
vascular.
protection, yeah.
Yes,
I think it's protection. So it's actually protecting, every other thing that you find in the blood vessel. It's protecting those smooth muscles and protecting the endothelium. Because an injury to your endothelium, once your endothelium is injured, it will lead to a kind of inflammation of the blood vessel. And once that happens, there'll be a lot of inflammatory mediators that will be released, and it will affect blood flow. Injury to the endothelium can lead to what we call uh, um, atherosclerosis can happen when there's an injury also to the endothelium. Thrombosis of blood. The blood can gather somewhere when there's an injury to the wall of this blood vessel, to the endothelium. So any injury you have there can obstruct the flow of blood and make blood coagulate at that place. So you have formation of thrombosis of blood, and that thrombosis of blood could lead to an emboli, and that emboli can travel and go to your pulmonary artery and block it, and then you have what is called pulmonary embolism, which is dangerous. So it is important that the endothelium is protected, because the endothelium, we said, they are epithelial cells And because they are epithelial cells, they must be protected. That is why we have all of these other layers, the adventitia, preventing injury to the endothelium. Okay,
Yes, sir.
good. Now, let's see what next we have here. I think here, this is just an explanation of the blood vessels. We already did this before. We already explained the blood vessels, the arteries, they carry blood under high pressure. We already explained all of these yesterday. So I think what we will do today, I want to explain the heart. I want to go to the structure of the heart and show you that the heart has three layers. I'm taking you to the heart now. Let's go to the heart. Page 136. Now, the heart is located in the thoracic cavity. Okay, the heart is located in the thoracic cavity, and it is located a little bit to the left. So the heart occupies the middle of the thoracic cavity, a little bit tilted to the left side. So if you look at your chest, for example, that's your thoracic cavity, the left part of it, between the middle and the left part, you will find your heart. Your heart is located there. Now, but this heart is located inside a cavity, or it is surrounded by a layer of pericardium. So the position of the heart is covered by what we call the pericardium. I'm going to show you now. Let me get the exact, yeah, I think this is where it is. The pericardium. So the heart is like in a sac, and that sac is what we call the pericardium. Let me see if I can get that here. Let me see. 136. 136. I'll use a diagram to explain it to you. Okay. Yes. So the heart is located in the pericardial cavity. The pericardial cavity. Yeah, this is it. Yeah. And this is, later we'll look at the blood supply and the nerve supply to the pericardium. We'll look at all of that later. What I want to show you is on page, yeah, good. So this is the heart here. Now, we already said before that the heart is a muscular organ, okay, and it propels blood into the pulmonary artery and the aorta. We already explained that, and we already said that the heart has four chambers, the right and the left atrium. We already did that here. And then here, I told you that the heart has a sound also. I mentioned that, and that
yes, sir.
the heart sound is dependent on the closure, yeah, of those valves that we talked about. Here you will find it. The heart sounds are produced by the snapping shots of the one-way valves that normally keep blood from flowing backward. Because we said that those valves prevent the backflow of blood. And we say the heart of this, the sound of the heart that we hear through a stethoscope is lob, dub sound. Lob, dub sound. Now, the lob sound is when blood from the atria is entering the ventricle. So when blood from the atria enters the ventricle, you hear the lob sound. And then you hear the dub sound when the ventricle pushes the blood from the heart. Lob sound when blood enters the ventricle from the atrium. and then the dub sound when blood leaves the ventricles. Now, we said when blood leaves the atrium to the ventricle, two valves will open, yes? What are the two valves that will open? Tricuspid and mitral valve, yeah? And bicuspid. So they will open. So that sound, and once the blood enters, the valve will close also. So you hear the lob sound. Then when the ventricles now push the blood out into the aorta and the pulmonary artery, we said two other valves will quickly close. Yeah, the aortic valve and the pulmonary valve. Okay, and the sound of that valve you hear as the dub sound. Good. Now, see what I wanted to show you. The wall of each heart. Now, because the heart, we said, is a muscular organ, but the muscles or the heart itself is made up of three layers. Just the way we said that the blood vessels have three tunics or three layers, the heart itself has three layers. But I already said that the heart is located in what we call the pericardial cavity, and the heart has three layers, the chambers of the heart. They are the endocardium. So the endocardium is the internal layer, just like you had in the blood vessel where you had an intima. So the intima is just like the endocardium for the heart. For the blood vessel, it is intima. For the heart, it is endocardium. Now that endocardium contains endothelium and subendothelial connective tissue. Sometimes you also see a lining membrane of the heart that also covers the valves. But the major thing you see in the endocardium is the endothelium and a subendothelial connective tissue. Then the middle layer is the myocardium. So the myocardium is a thick helical middle layer composed of what? Cardiac muscles. In the blood vessels, you have smooth muscles in the tunica media. In the heart, the middle layer called myocardium contains cardiac muscles, not smooth muscles, but cardiac muscles. Later in histology, you will see the difference between smooth muscles and cardiac muscles in terms of the structure. Okay, so for the heart, it is cardiac muscle. For the blood vessels, it is smooth muscles. And then the outermost layer, you have the epicardium. So this epicardium is a thin external layer formed by the visceral layer of serous pericardium. So we said that the heart itself is covered by the pericardium. The outermost layer of the heart is covered by the pericardium. But then the heart has three main tunics or three main layers. The endocardium is the innermost layer, the myocardium is the middle layer, and the epicardium is the outermost layer. This epicardium is in contact with the pericardium. The pericardium is like the adventitia of the blood vessel that we talked about. Okay, so that is where you find the pericardium. But let me see if there is a diagram that shows these. I think in the atlas you will find it better in the atlas. Let me see if the diagram explained. Okay, this diagram didn't show those three layers that I mentioned, but know that the heart has three layers: endocardium, myocardium, and the outermost epicardium. Okay, good. Then there is something else I wanted you to know about the heart. Something else I wanted you to know about the heart. This picture here is showing you how the heart contracts. We already did this, where the blood is moving to. Let me see what else is here. Okay, so in histology, you will go deeper into the structure. Now, quickly, let's look at the structure of the heart. Now, the heart actually has two main parts, okay? Two main parts. It is the apex of the heart and the base of the heart. The heart has two main parts, not layers now, not layers. What I talked about before are layers. The endocardium, myocardium, and the epicardium are layers. But the heart itself is divided into two parts. We have the apex and the base. Now, normally, do you think that the base of the heart will be on top or below? So this is the structure. Let's say this is the structure of the heart. Yes, this is the heart. Normally, we usually have the base under, but for the heart, the apex of the heart is the lowermost part of the heart. Look at here. Look at this place. This is the apex of the heart. It is the lowermost part of the heart. While this part here, the upper part of the heart, this upper part of the heart here is the base. The upper part of the heart, this upper part you see here, is the base of the heart. So if they ask you what are the two parts of the heart, it is the base and the apex. The apex is the lowermost part of the heart. Now, you will see what make up that lowermost part of the heart and what make up the base. So let's look at each of them. Now, the apex of the heart is formed by the inferiolateral part of the left ventricle. So what forms the apex of the heart? The inferiolateral part of the left ventricle. So in this diagram, this part here is your left ventricle. Because this is the inferiolateral part of the heart, this apex. So this is the left ventricle here. And you can see from this labeling, left ventricle. So this left ventricle region, the down part on the left side is the apex of the heart. So that is an exam question. Which part of the heart forms the apex of the heart? So it is the inferiolateral part of the left ventricle. Now, some anatomical landmark. How do you know where the apex is located if you want to count the ribs or the intercostal spaces? The apex of the heart is located posterior to the left fifth intercostal space. You did anatomy already in the first year, so you know how to count the intercostal spaces, okay? Now, those intercostal spaces on your rib cage, once you get to the fifth intercostal space, the left side of that, on your left side of your thoracic cavity, posterior to it, behind it, that is where you find the apex of the heart. And that is very important because when you want to auscultate, you want to hear the sound of the heart, a doctor can tell you to auscultate the apex beat of the heart, the apex beat of the heart. And for you to find that apex beat, you need to find where the apex of the heart is. And how do you find it? You need to count until you get to your fifth intercostal space. Okay? Now, they said it is usually approximately 9 centimeters, okay, from the median line. So the median line is your sternum, that the breastbone, yeah, the sternum. So 9 centimeters to the left of that median line on the fifth intercostal space, there you find the apex of the heart. Now, the apex of the heart remains motionless throughout the cardiac circle. So it is not moving up and down. It is motionless, the apex of the heart. Now, that apex of the heart is also the place where you get the apex beat, which I mentioned before. So the apex of the heart is where the sounds of the mitral valve closure are maximal. So if you want to hear that sound that we talked about, yeah, that's lob dub sound of the heart that you talked about. If you want to hear it, you put your stethoscope on the apex of the heart, because that is where the mitral valve is located. Let me see if I can show you. Where is my stethoscope? I'm going to try to show you. Let me put it on my video. So if they ask you to, where is my video? Yeah. Good. You can see me now, right?
Mm.
Now, if they ask you to find the apex beat of the heart, okay? Let me see, you can't see me. So this is my left side of my heart, yeah? This is the left side of my heart. Now, my fifth intercostal space is somewhere here, just below, this is nipples, just below the nipples, but a little to the left. So this is where you find the apex beat. So if they ask you to auscultate the apex beat, your stethoscope will be just below the nipples, a little to the left, because that is where the apex of the heart is, and that is where the mitral valve is. So if you do this and put it in your ears, you hear the sound of the mitral valve. You hear that lob dub heartbeat. Okay, so that is where your apex beat is. But I think in anatomy they might not ask you to auscultate in anatomy, but in physiology they will ask you to auscultate, and you need to know where the apex beat is. So the apex of the heart is located on the fifth intercostal space, behind the fifth intercostal space on the left side. So the apex of the heart is located posterior to the left fifth intercostal space in an adult, and it is 9 centimeters from the sternum or from the median line. Okay, and we said that that is where you measure the apex beat, and the apex beat is where you hear the sound of the closure of the mitral valve or the bicuspid valve. Okay, good. Now the base of the heart. So the base of the heart is the posterior aspect of the heart. The posterior aspect of the heart. It is formed mainly by the left atrium, with a lesser contribution by the right atrium. So when you look at this picture, okay, where is this is the right atrium, okay? A little part of the right atrium contributes to the base of the heart, while the main part is the left atrium. So here you find the left atrium. Here they wrote left auricle here. This is where the left atrium is. So the left atrium forms majorly the base of the heart, with a little contribution from the right atrium. So the base of the heart is the posterior aspect of the heart, made up mainly of the left atrium, with a little contribution from the right atrium. So from here down like this to the back of the heart, to the posterior aspect of the heart, forms what we'll call the base of the heart. Now, the base of the heart faces posteriorly toward the body of the vertebra, the bone. Okay, so the base of the heart is facing the vertebra, T6 to T9. So the thoracic vertebra T6 to T9, you find the base of the heart within that region, and is separated from them by the pericardium. Okay, and then the base of the heart also extends superiorly to the bifurcation of the pulmonary trunk. Where is the pulmonary trunk? This is the pulmonary trunk here.
Yes.
So this pulmonary trunk splits into the left pulmonary artery and the right superior pulmonary artery. So, but when it is leaving the right ventricle, it is the pulmonary trunk, then it splits into the left pulmonary artery and the right pulmonary artery. But this pulmonary trunk also forms part of the base of the heart. So it extends superiorly to the bifurcation of the pulmonary trunk and inferiorly to the coronary sulcus. Later, I'm going to show you the coronary sulcus because the heart itself gets blood supply from the coronary artery, which I'm going to teach you maybe in the next anatomy class. You see that the heart itself, even though it's pumping blood, it still receives blood supply for the heart to function. Just the way your kidney, your liver, they all need blood to function. The heart
Okay.
itself receives blood supply by the coronary arteries, okay? And that coronary artery passes through and open like a gutter called the coronary sulcus. This picture does not, okay, here you find these blood vessels you see here. These are coronary arteries, yes? These coronary arteries are inside a gutter. If I remove this coronary artery now, you see a gutter there. And that gutter is called the coronary sulcus. So you see here, down to this place is a sulcus, which is called the coronary sulcus, where the coronary artery passes. So this coronary artery is what supplies blood to the heart for the heart to be able to function. So the base of the heart, we said, is the posterior aspect of the heart, okay? Posterior aspect of the heart, and it is mainly formed by the left atrium with a little contribution from the right atrium. It faces posteriorly to the body of the T6 to T9 thoracic vertebra, okay? And then it extends superiorly to the bifurcation of the pulmonary artery, and then it receives pulmonary veins on the right and left side of its left atrial portion. What does that mean? Here you find the pulmonary veins here. This is right superior pulmonary vein, this one. So these pulmonary veins, the bifurcation of this pulmonary artery, a part of the right atrium and majorly the left atrium all form the base of the heart. So the base of the heart is formed by the following. One, the left atrium with a little contribution from the right atrium. Then we have the bifurcation of the pulmonary artery, and then we have these pulmonary veins. All of these form the base of the heart, while the apex of the heart, we said, is formed by the inferior lateral part of the left ventricle, which is located in the fifth intercostal, posterior to the fifth intercostal space. And this is where you hear the apex beat of the heart. Yeah, so that is what you need to know about the base of the heart and the apex of the heart. Most students make the mistake of saying that the apex of the heart is on top. No, the apex of the heart is down, is the inferior lateral part, while the base is up, okay? But mainly posterior, like on the back side of the heart. So that is what you need to know about the parts of the heart. There is one thing you need to know. Look at this small diagram here. Okay, so the heart also has borders: a superior border, a right border, a left border, and a diaphragmatic surface. So the superior border of the heart, the upper part of the heart, then you have the right border of the heart on this side, you have the left border of the heart on this side, and then you have a diaphragmatic surface under here, because the heart is sitting on top of the diaphragm. So under here, if you look at the full anatomy of the body, under here you will find the diaphragm is under here. So you have the diaphragmatic border, the right border, the left border, and then you have the base and you have the apex of the heart. So that is the structure of the heart. So before we finish, before we round off, I want you to quickly tell me about the 3 layers of the heart, not the parts of the heart, the 3 layers of the heart.
The Epicardium, the Myocardium, and the Endocardium.
Which is the innermost layer?
Yes, sir.
Which one is the innermost layer?
The innermost layer is the Endocardium.
And it contains what?
Endothelium and subepithelial connective tissue.
Good. What about the myocardium? It contains what?
Sir?
Myocardium. What does it contain?
Cardiac muscles.
Cardiac muscles. Good. And then you have the
epicardium.
Okay. So the epicardium is the outermost layer, which is in contact with the serous pericardium. Okay. Which is in contact with the serous pericardium. Good. And we said the heart has how many parts?
2. The apex and the base.
Apex and the base. What forms the apex?
What forms the apex of the heart?
Left ventricle, yeah?
The left ventricle.
The left ventricle, the inferior lateral part of the left ventricle. Inferior lateral part of the left ventricle, okay? And that is located in the 5th intercostal space on the left side, okay? And then that is where you hear the apex beats. Then the base, what forms the base of the heart?
The base of the left atrium.
Left atrium with a little contribution from right
atrium. Right atrium.
Good. And then we also have, what else do we have in that base? The bifurcation of the pulmonary artery, of the pulmonary trunk, yeah, and inferior and the coronary sulcus. Okay, so in the base we have the left atrium, a part of the right atrium, the bifurcation of the pulmonary trunk, the coronary sulcus, and some portion of the pulmonary veins. So these form the base of the heart. So this whole place like this, on the base of the heart, this whole place on the base of the heart. Why this one here on the apex of the heart? One last question. Give me the tunics of the blood vessels.
Tunica Adventitia, Tunica Media, and Tunica Intima.
Intima. Tunica Intima, what do you find?
Tunica Intima, you can find the endothelium and the elastic fiber, like the internal elastic membrane.
Okay, you find endothelium.
Internal elastic layer. Use vascular endothelium and the subendothelial layer.
Okay, subendothelial layer. Okay. And then
Media.
Tunica media, what do you find?
External elastic membrane and smooth muscle.
And smooth muscles, okay. And then the last tunic is the adventitia, yes?
Yes, sir.
Okay. What about in the veins? What do you find?
the capillaries.
In the veins.
Oh, the veins. Okay, the veins you find three of them too, but it doesn't have external elastic membrane. In the intima, you can find the
Endothelium.
vascular endothelium and the internal elastic layer.
Okay, so but there's no subendothelial layer. Yeah.
Yes, most of it. And media only has smooth muscles.
Okay, good. So why is the artery thicker than the vein?
Um, because where's the artery bigger than the vein? The smooth
Thicker.
muscles are like thicker,
Mhm.
and because of the smooth muscles,
Okay, but both of them have smooth muscles. Yes.
the smooth muscle is more in the artery,
And the artery.
and in veins they don't have external elastic membrane,
Good. And subendothelial layer.
subendothelial layer.
Good. Very good. Very, very good. So that is what you need to know about the anatomy of the anatomy of the heart and the blood vessels. Then I mentioned briefly that the heart has four surfaces, yes, or borders. Okay, four surfaces or four borders, but we will look at them um, in the next. I just mentioned them, but we will explain them in the next class. The each of the borders and each of the surfaces. We'll look at them in the next class. Then we'll look at the inner layer of each of these chambers of the heart. Okay, good, good, good. So tomorrow we will answer some questions on the heart and the blood vessels, and then I would maybe give you more diagrams to explain all the structures of the heart, the innermost structure of the heart. I will look for the anatomy atlas. You can find an electronic copy of the atlas so that I could use it to explain to you tomorrow. Do you have any question?
No, sir.
Okay, good. Thank you. See you tomorrow.